Hey guys, and welcome to Money Talks News, the podcast. Question: where do you go for financial advice? There are countless sources for financial tips, including this podcast, for example, but a lot of us don't trust traditional sources of advice. Only 31% of people consider an advisor as the most trusted source for financial advice. Only 3% trust social media. Maybe one reason people are reluctant to rely on mass market sources is because a lot of the advice is one size doesn't exactly fit anybody. How do you take some of the money ideas you see and tailor them to your personal situation? Let's find out. Our guest today knows what it's like to throw traditional money rules out the window and forge her own path. I'm Stacey Johnson as usual. My co-host will be financial journalist Miranda Marquardt. Hello, Miranda.
Hey, I think I'm super excited about this because sometimes I do things that I'm not supposed to do with my money. So I'm excited to have somebody else on here where we're just doing things we're not supposed to with our money.
I'm excited to hear about all the stupid things you do with your money.
I think they're great things to do with my money.
Listening in and sometimes contributing is our producer and novice investor, Aaron Freeman. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, so I looked that up, and we're only trusted by 3% on this podcast. So, let's just stop listening and go ask your friend for financial advice.
This isn't social media. This is an authoritative podcast.
This is authoritative Money Talks News. This is Money Talks News.
That's right. We don't follow the rules. We make the goddamn rules.
Okay. 100% trust here, people. 100% trust.
Okay. Now can I continue with my introduction here? Today we're also talking to Gigi Gonzalez, the author of the best-selling book, Cultura Cash. Hello, Gigi.
Hi, Stacey. Thanks for having me on. Hi, Miranda. Hi, Aaron.
Thanks for being here with us. And by the way, for those of you probably thought I slurred, and I do slur a lot, but when I said Cultura Cash, that is the Spanish word for culture. I'm bilingual.
Yep.
I actually looked that up to make sure. Anyway.
Yeah, you got it right. You got the pronunciation right too.
Yeah. Well, I figured it must be culture. Anyway, before we start, folks, remember that on this podcast, you need to do your own research and consult your own experts for acting on anything that you may hear on this podcast. Okay, this is to keep us from getting sued and for you to do a better job managing your money. Okay, let's dive in. Now, first question I have for you, Gigi. Cultura Cash. I read the title. I've not read the book, unfortunately. Why? This tells me that if I'm not a Spanish speaker, I don't want to read this book. Is that true?
Kind of. I kind of did it on purpose. Yeah. I mean, the book is written for a very specific reader, and that reader is a first-generation American. For anybody that's not familiar with that term, is usually the children of immigrants. I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants. So both my parents were born in Mexico. I was born here in the United States. So I have to navigate my American culture here in my life in the U.S., as well as my parents' native country, their culture in Latin America, specifically in Mexico. So I knew with a title like Cultura Cash, it would immediately speak to that very important reader that I was trying to reach.
No, why is it different? I see this a lot, actually, in the personal finance realm, in lots of realms, actually. There's books written just for women, books written just for, for people of color, blah, blah, blah. And I was going to say middle-aged white guy, but I'm not. I'm an old white guy. Anyway, so, and there are lots of, and there are also people who target that audience. So what makes it different for first-gen Americans?
Ooh, there's quite a lot. So... And I learned this from my own experience, right? Because basically my money journey was I had to self-teach myself personal finance because my immigrant parents were so busy on just surviving and keeping food on the table and adapting to a new country that they didn't have the knowledge or the tools to pass any sort of financial teachings to me. And of course, we all know we don't learn this stuff in school either. So after having lots of financial hardships in my 20s, I said, enough of this. I cannot keep saying, I don't know how money works and keep using this as an excuse. Let's do better. So I immersed myself in financial literacy through books. I checked out a bunch of books from my library. I bought books. I ended up reading over 50 personal finance books, a lot of the classics, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Automatic Millionaire, a lot of Susie Orman. And I learned a lot of great information about the ABCs of how to pay off debt, how to reduce your taxes, how to start investing. But what was missing was how to navigate my finances with my family. And this matters to first-generation Americans because our family and our culture is a very collectivist culture, which means that we're very family-oriented, very communal. which means our money is communal too. So any money that I make isn't just for myself. It's always going to be money that should be available to my grandma if she has a medical emergency, or my dad if his car breaks down. And none of these books taught me how to manage both. So that's why I knew that there was this unique angle missing in the market.
That's why my money belongs to my wife.
Now, and actually, though, I have to say, isn't that true of everyone? I mean, if my grandmother were alive and she needed an operation, I would certainly be, inclined to help her. I mean, how is it so different?
Yeah, of course. Of course, it could be. I think from the people I've met through life and college and the workplace, a lot of the white middle-class Americans are usually set up by their parents in some way or another, whether it's they get sort of assistance in helping them pay for college tuition, or they help them with their first down payment, or when Granny Gertrude passes away, they get a small inheritance. Maybe they don't get the generational wealth, but at least they get the generational knowledge where they get some basics on what is a checking account. This is how credit cards work. Where with first generation Americans, the children of immigrants, we don't get any of that. We don't get any generational wealth whatsoever because our parents came here with nothing, looking for a better opportunity for their children. And again, they don't have any sort of knowledge on the U.S. financial system. As newcomers to this country, they're learning a new language, they're far away from family, they're experiencing racism. So the last thing on their mind is learning how to master the U.S. financial system, especially when they don't have a lot of money to go around. Something that also affects our experience to learn financial literacy or any sort of financial education is our family usually has a lot of mistrust of financial systems because of how poorly regulated the financial institutions were in their home country. And those mistrust feelings often get passed on to us. So that's why a lot of us, our parents, are underbanked, underserved, because they'd rather keep their money underneath the mattress than to actually put it in a bank or put it in the stock market.
That's very true, because my wife's parents used to bury it in the backyard in a tin can.
Is that true?
Yes.
Well, and they're from Argentina.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. My parents were raised in the Depression, so they were very leery of traditional financial institutions as well.
Right.
So, okay, now, the title of our podcast is 5 Ways Traditional Personal Finance Advice Misses the Mark. And so now I'm starting to understand what this is going to be about. So traditional personal financial advice here in the United States may not apply to people from other cultures. Is that where we're going here?
Yeah, I think so. I think out of all those money books that I read, they were all written mostly by white male authors, and they wrote in an American individualistic point of view, which means that money was always just for yourself, focus on your financial picture, building savings for yourself, getting yourself out of debt, building and improving your credit, investing for your future. There was never any conversation about how to do all those same things with family in mind. So a big pain point for my community, the first generation American community, is a lot of us feel that we're our parents' retirement plan. Because again, our parents were immigrants, usually working low paying jobs or jobs that didn't offer them any sort of workplace benefits like a 401k. So when it comes time to retire, because they're too old to keep working, a lot of them think that Social Security is going to be enough, and it's not. So that often falls on the quote unquote successful first generation American college student, right? Who made it out and got these better opportunities because our parents sacrificed to come here. But it's hard. It's hard to build something for ourselves with no generational wealth. And then on top of that, to feel the pressure of having to give back to extended family members.
Now, how does that inform your actions then? I understand what you're saying, but how does that change what you do?
So much. I mean, from what career path you decide on. There's a lot of people that they don't even try to pursue something that they would consider their dream or any sort of entrepreneurship goals because they know they need a steady job right away to make money and support their family, whether that's their parents or siblings that are coming after them. That was the case for me. For example, when I was an economics major at UC Santa Barbara, and I was very interested in the track of being a financial planner. How funny, right? Kind of full circle that I'm kind of in this space. So I was very interested in that track and actually interned for a financial planner in Santa Barbara. But what I saw was how he's basically an entrepreneur, right? And he had to constantly be out in networking events, meeting people, shaking hands so that he could continue to get business. And for me, knowing that I had no safety net at home because my immigrant parents were just getting by themselves, I knew I needed something more stable. So I couldn't go into something like entrepreneurship or being a financial planner or working for myself. So what did I do instead? I went and I worked for a corporation like most of my peers do.
What kind of business did you go into?
My first job was working in auto insurance at Progressive Insurance. I processed auto claims. And even that was an intentional job because I said, okay, I need something that's recession proof. People are always going to get into car accidents no matter what happens. So that's just a job that's pretty stable. After some time, I didn't feel professionally fulfilled. So I pivoted to investment management. So my most recent job in corporate, I was working with large institutional investors like public pension funds, endowments, and foundations, and I would do their investment performance reporting.
Interesting.
John Oliver just did a in-depth piece on student loans and how that's
I
just
saw that.
ripping people apart and the deceptive practices that these loan companies are doing to keep these people perpetually in debt. Do you talk about that in your book?
Yeah, I talk about how to pay off debt. I didn't want to focus too much on things I can't control, right? And laws are changing all the time. Interest rates are changing. So instead I said, hey, I know you have debt because if you're like me, you didn't have parents that set up a 529 for you. So you had to get into debt to go to college. You have this debt. Let's not be passive about it because that's a mistake I made. And it got me into bad situations where I didn't have enough money to leave a toxic Craigslist roommate that I thought was going to stab me in the middle of the night, right? Because my debt was too high. So instead, I encourage people to be proactive with their debt payoff journey. And I teach them the snowball method, the avalanche method. And I also have to teach them a lot of unlearnings that we tend to learn from our culture. For example, my family, I was taught that you're always going to have debt no matter what. So when my family saw that I started being proactive and paying off my debt aggressively, they're like, what's the point? You're still going to get yourself into debt later. And that's not true. I've been debt free for 3 years, right? So there's a lot of harmful money narratives too that come as being the children of immigrants.
I'm sorry, but I missed a lot of what you said after your roommate was going to stab you.
I just kind of threw that in there.
I was actually going to say, I think though, we talk about this stuff with first-gen Americans and everything else, but we also talk about these money habits that are passed down from our parents. And even if we're not first gen, even if our parents have been here for, our parents were born here, there's still some stuff that we get passed down that we kind of, like, my parents never taught me about investing. My parents had no real concept of investing. They taught me about credit cards and having a checking account, but not investing. And so I had to learn that on my own. And at least I did know how to navigate. Thankfully, my parents were able to help me navigate student loans and all of that kind of stuff. But I had friends who had no idea how to do that. And they ended up with way more debt than I did because I knew how to navigate the system. And so I think there's a lot of that too. Like, how do we learn to navigate the system no matter where we're at?
Hey, my family's been in the country since the 1600s, and I still don't trust any of these institutions.
Well, I always want to throw this in whenever I'm talking to people who are younger than me, which is virtually everyone. But I went to the University of Arizona, out of state tuition, $600 a semester. My parents paid for my college, but it was cheap.
Right.
I mean, and now it's just
world.
stupid expensive. I mean, it's just it's a national disgrace, actually. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I digress. So what other kinds of things would not apply to this cultural community or any cultural community that are traditional things that we say in personal finance?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I heard you on a podcast and I can't remember. Oh, I know what one was: buying a new car. You're never supposed to buy a new car. You do buy new cars.
I do. Mm-hmm.
And so and so do you, right, Miranda?
I do too. Yes.
And explain. Does that have to do with? Is that just you personally, or is that something cultural?
Personally, I would say, for me, I knew that I'd rather spend money on a new car that I know I'm going to maintain well and it won't need a lot of maintenance later with some mechanic that I don't know. That's not my world. And I just knew that once I was done paying it off, I would drive that baby until the wheels fell off. That's the point, right? To keep driving it afterwards. The mistake people make is they get new cars, they pay off the loan, then they get another one, and they just stay in this cycle of debt. So yeah, I know traditional personal finance advice is to buy a lightly used 2 to 3 year old reliable vehicle. But for me, being that I was on my own at the time in LA and my family was in Mexico and I didn't want to learn everything about mechanic and didn't want to get screwed over by mechanics, I just felt safer being in a new car where I knew I wouldn't be stranded on the side of the road.
Well, that makes sense. And that's your logic too, isn't it, Miranda?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Like I like having, like I get the new car, I have it for 10 years and then I get another new car. And I actually finance mine because I can get a pretty low rate. The car I've got right now has a 2.49% interest rate. So I leave my money in the market, getting a better return, working for me. And then I have a new car that, once again, like Gigi says, I don't have to worry about it breaking down. I don't have to keep taking it in for service. Like I just have the regular service and we're good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I just bought a car last Monday. It's a 2022, and that's a new. The car I got rid of is a 2009.
Oh wow! So yeah,
I've never owned a new car.
You had it for a while.
I bought one new car, and that was for my wife. I've never owned a new car. But it's still under warranty and everything. It only had 10,000 miles on it.
No,
so,
it's not bad.
Yeah, so we can agree to disagree on that. What about debt in general? I have found that a lot of people, and I want to know what I'm asking if this is true in the community where you grew up, Gigi, that debt was like a part of life. You were going to get a car loan. You were going to get a loan for this and a loan for that, and you were going to run up credit card. I mean, it was just what people did. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you fight against, I assume.
Of course. Yeah. No, I tell people that that's a very harmful money mindset, and maybe that's what worked for our parents to survive in this new country, but we have the privilege of achieving more because we have been college educated. We have more opportunities to make a larger income. So just because that worked for our parents doesn't mean it's going to work for us.
Yep. Okay. Oh, I just noticed that I'm more than halfway through the show. So if you like what we do, folks, do something for us. Share the show with your friends and family on your favorite social platforms and subscribe to our podcast. I mean, gosh, it only takes you 2 seconds, but it really helps us. So I'm going to wait here while you do it. Go ahead. Okay, you did it. Okay, now let's get back to where we were. What other kinds of stuff that are specific to your community, Gigi, that you find contradictory advice being given in large in the United States?
Sure. I subscribe to David Bach's newsletter because I learned a lot from David Bach. I read almost all his books, and out of all the financial pundits, he's probably my favorite. And he recently sent a newsletter that said 100 financial commandments that will stand the test of time. I'm like, let me see what he has to say. And one of them I did not agree with, and it was this notion of never loan money to people because you're not a bank. And I remember I was dating a guy in my early 20s. He's white. And he would see how my family would frequently approach me for short-term loans or to pay for this. And he's like, you're not a bank. Why are you doing this? And I'm like, because that's what I'm supposed to do. As a good Mexican daughter, I'm expected to provide that financial support. And what I can also see is that sometimes giving with no boundaries is harmful to our own finances. And that I learned that myself, where I was so giving to my family because culturally I was expected to do that and to be obedient and to be self-sacrificing. But then when I was caught in any sort of financial emergency, there was nobody there to bail me out because everybody else was broke, right? So I learned, you know what, maybe I have to put my oxygen mask first, make sure that I'm in a good financial position. And then once I'm better, I can give more freely to those that I love. And that's what I've done in the book. I share the notion of financial boundaries, which again is something that I never saw mentioned in any of those 50 traditional personal finance books. So when I teach the 5 pillars of my book, which are how to budget, how to build savings, how to build credit, how to pay off debt, and how to start investing, at the end of each chapter, there's a layer of, okay, how can you plan an emergency fund for your family? So you have your own emergency fund for your needs, but then if you know you want to be available to family if something suddenly happens, let's start creating a separate emergency for them so that you feel safe and it's not tapping into your money. Or if you're regularly providing an allowance to family, let's add them into your budget as a line item, where again, none of these other money books ever talked about that.
That's very interesting. But let me ask you this, though. Sometimes I've lent money to people and they paid me back and everything was wonderful. But that's rare. And I'm not talking about family so much as friends. But a lot of times I find that people who need money don't pay it back. And if you're 40 years old and you need to borrow money, you're probably going to need to borrow it again. I guess what I'm asking you, Gigi, is this: how do you keep from from being used by people?
Yeah, it's a hard conversation for my reader and my community to have with people they love. And it took me a while to feel comfortable implementing boundaries, especially coming from the Latino culture where we are very enmeshed. We are up in everybody's business. We know everything that's going on. We're so close. So any sort of boundary or no is very unnatural and it's very frowned upon. So it's something that my reader has to learn, that it's okay to say no sometimes or not right now, and that boundaries are not selfish. It doesn't mean you're a bad daughter. It means that you are taking self-care of your own finances, right? So that you can show up stronger for others later. Regarding debt, I do want to chime in too. Something that's very prevalent in my community is asking to borrow somebody's good credit, because usually our family doesn't have a credit line. So for example, I was contacted by a family member to cover a $7,000 surgery. I was only 23 years old. I had a bunch of student debt, car note, I had no savings. But what I did have was a $10,000 credit line. And my family knew that. They knew, hey, we know you don't have $7,000 in cash, but we know you got this credit line and she needs a surgery. Can you pay for it? And I wasn't confident that this person would pay me back. And I understood the ramifications that if this person stopped paying the monthly payment on the credit card, it was up to me. And I didn't have the money to do that. So even that was a big fight with my family, and something that I would argue most white middle-class Americans don't typically have to deal with like having their adult parents asking to borrow their credit line.
Yeah, you're right. That is true.
I think one of the things to remember is most personal finance advice, as Gigi says, is aimed at middle class to upper middle class white folks. And so it doesn't really work for everybody. The main stuff that we get, just buy a used car, just do this, just do that, save your money. A lot of people are lower income and the regular personal finance advice does not work for them either. A lot of folks just are not going to be served by that personal finance advice until they can get through and move up to certain levels. Like one of the big things is if you have $10 extra, put that toward paying down your debt. And it's like, okay, how much of my debt is that going to pay down? I've just worked 40 hours at minimum wage. Maybe what I want with my extra $10 is a small treat to get me going again when I have to do this again next week. The math that you do and the way that you respond to these things is different. And then also, I look at young people today, like my son and his friends, and their situation is they're just like, well, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. Housing prices are out of control. Wages have not kept up with productivity or whatever measures you want to use. And so a lot of them are just, what is the point of any of this? And so I think that's part of the issue too, is regular personal finance advice also assumes that people have something to look forward to in life. And that's not always the case sometimes when you feel stuck. And I think one of the things that personal finance advice misses out on, among many things, we do live in a society. There are a lot of systemic things in place that make it difficult for individuals to, we pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But most personal finance advice is aimed at the assumption that you're upper middle class to middle class, that you have something to look forward to, and that you could achieve these goals. And we're kind of seeing that some people don't feel that.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with a lot of that. See, now I've got something I can pick on you about.
Now you can pick on me. It's great.
I think that the financial advice, obviously there are different levels of financial advice being thrown around out there, but I think a lot of financial advice is trying to help people get ahead that don't have a lot of, assets. And I don't know, I've been doing this for 30 years, and a lot of the advice we give is how to save money at the grocery store, how to find a cheaper flight, how to get a side gig, how to ask for a raise, how to do your resume. I could go on and on and on. I personally have written thousands of articles on these topics, and I think they are designed to help people without financial resources gain financial resources.
I can chime in here. I think another thing that's missing, another thing that's missing in traditional personal finance books, and I see it because now we're having more BIPOC authors come into the space. And what you'll notice in every BIPOC personal finance author's book is there's always a component that addresses your money mindset. That's not really something that I saw in any of the other books. I didn't see Susie Orman talking about it. I didn't see Jean Chatzky talking about it. And me, for my book, the first 2 chapters are focused on mindset. And why is that? That's because people like me, again, do have these systemic barriers that have caused us to have this negative relationship with money. So even though you can teach people the ABCs of personal finance, if they have a negative relationship with money because they saw their parents, their immigrant parents, stressed out at the kitchen table with bills, not knowing how they were going to pay for that month's bills, or they experienced food scarcity because there wasn't enough money to go around, or they experienced homelessness, any sort of money talk, they just shut out. They're like, money's evil, money's bad, I don't want to deal with it, and they become money avoidant. So that's why I encourage my reader to think about, what did you see modeled at home? Is this affecting you and your relationship to money now? And I'm not an expert in financial trauma. I'm not a mental health therapist. So I at least raise awareness about how money habits are developed as early as the age of 7. And if you do have any of those dark memories associated with money as a kid, it's important for you to heal those money wounds so that you can feel more empowered when you take on your money. And I say this because I lived this with my husband. When I met my husband, he had $60,000 in credit card debt, had no clue what he was doing with his money. He ultimately had to file for bankruptcy. And for me, it was very frustrating because I was very patient with him. I taught him everything I knew about money, and he got it. I would check in with him for comprehension, and he would reply back that he knew what I was talking about. But he wasn't able to execute. And I'm like, what is missing, David? What is missing that I've taught you everything? You know this, but you still aren't able to stick to the plan. And through therapy, we learned that he had a bad relationship with money because his parents used to constantly argue with money as a child. And my husband is very introverted. Like me, if my parents did used to fight, and I'd be like, shut up, get divorced already. You guys are annoying, right? But my husband, instead, he would just go inward, and he would be very scared of the adults fighting. So that affected his relationship to money. So even though, like I said, he had the best teacher in the world, hello, me, to teach him the money basics, he wasn't able to execute that plan until he learned that he had those money wounds, and he worked with therapy to heal them.
That's interesting because my first book actually was Life or Debt. And I spent the first 2 chapters or 3 even of that book talking about your attitude toward money. And my father grew up in the Depression, dirt poor. And he always had an attitude about people with money that they cheated to get it. And even the Bible says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to gain entrance to the kingdom of God. And these are the types of attitudes that I grew up with. And so, if you can't overcome that, then you can look at the people who win the lottery and lose everything. Look at the people who lose everything and end up rich again. I mean, it's your attitude is everything about money. And I would assume that that's true across any culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, do me one favor, Gigi, before we run out of time. I'm a person from the Hispanic community. Tell me something I know it's only in a few seconds, but what's the main thing that you want me to know?
That your culture and your family and your community affect how you interact with money. So that's why my book is important. My book talks about these cultural norms in the Latino community and how some of them are harmful, some of them are helpful, but money isn't vanilla. It affects us all differently. So it's important that this book was out, and the reviews show it. I have over 100 5-star reviews. The book has only been out two months, and it's because his voice was missing. Yeah, but I think any listeners here, I would encourage you to listen to the book, to read the book, even though it was written for a first-generation Latina. I did write it for secondary readers, which would be white allies who are looking to learn more about the challenges that first-generation Americans have in their financial journey. And ultimately, it's going to help you be more inclusive with the way that you reach your audience or teach financial literacy to others.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds very cross-cultural. I could hear a lot of nuances that could just be applied to all kinds of different things. You could even hear it applied to anybody with a cousin or a sibling. But if one sibling is well off and another sibling isn't, the siblings putting pressure on you for money, because it seems like a lot of this is related to guilt, family guilt. You're doing better than me, you can afford it, what are you talking about? It's not going to cost you much. Look at me, I need help. And I can see that in a lot of different families.
I agree. You're right. Word. Okay, guys, we are out of time, folks, but we are never out of topic. This is an interesting topic, too, so dig a little deeper. You're going to find links to lots more info in our show notes. And remember, if your goal is to make more, to spend less, to retire rich, and you're a white person, oh wait, no, that wasn't part of the script. Your online home is moneytalksnews.com. And don't forget to check out Miranda's online home as well. That is Miranda Marquit, MARQUIT.com. And of course, you want to visit Gigi at her website. And tell me if I'm right about this, Gigi, the firstgenmentor.com. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's my TikTok name.
Firstgenmentor.com. And it's going to be in our show notes, so folks, you don't have to try to remember it. If you've got a question, comment, or topic you'd like to suggest, please tell us about it. You can email us at hello@moneytalksnews.com. One final thing, you heard me say it at the halfway mark, but if you like what we do, please do something for us and subscribe to our podcast. It really helps us out. And leave us a nice review, too. Gigi, again, thank you so much for being with us. You're a wonderful person. I wish you the greatest of success, and we're going to count the minutes until you rejoin our podcast. I'm Stacey Johnson.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. I'm Stacey Johnson.
I'm Miranda Marquit.
I'm Aaron Freeman.
Thanks for hanging out with us, folks. We're going to see you right here next time.